The rain had stopped just as Thomas pulled into the driveway, the street glistening under the dim glow of a single lamppost. In the passenger seat lay a bouquet of red roses in a small velvet box, the last pieces of a plan he'd spent weeks imagining. He rehearsed the words in his head, steadying his breath. Tonight would be their new beginning. The house was quiet when he stepped inside. Vanilla candles burned low, their soft scent mixing with the faint aroma of wine. The dining table was set for two, though the second glass stood untouched. He smiled at the sight, mistaking the stillness for peace. "Sarah?" he called, voice echoing gently through the hall. No answer. He placed the flowers on the counter and loosened his tie, glancing around. The living room was spotless, too spotless, as if waiting for a photograph. A clock ticked steadily on the wall, and the refrigerator hummed like a slow pulse beneath the silence. His shoes clicked against the wooden floor as he walked deeper into the house. A faint reflection caught his eye, a shadow in the glass cabinet. He turned, heart quickening, expecting her to appear behind him with that nervous laugh she always had when he startled her. But only his own reflection stared back. Then came the whisper. Low measured, a breath more than a word. "You shouldn't have come home early," his heart thudded. The roses slid from the counter, petals scattering across the tile like blood drops under candlelight. Thomas froze, eyes searching the darkness beyond the kitchen doorway. The warmth of the room turned heavy, the air tightening around him. Somewhere in that quiet, something moved, and for the first time that night he realized he wasn't alone. The shape in the darkness moved into view. Sarah stepped from the hallway, her silhouette wavering in the candlelight. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying for hours, and her fingers shook around a half-filled glass of wine. The faint clink of liquid against glass was the only sound between them. "Happy anniversary," Thomas said softly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sarah's lips twitched into something that resembled a smile, but it vanished before it could form. "You came home early," she replied. Her tone wasn't surprise. It was accusation. He moved closer, pulling the velvet box from his pocket. "I thought we could start over." She looked down at the box, then at the roses on the counter. "You think flowers fix everything?" Her words cut with precision, calm yet venomous. The tension grew heavy, filling every corner of the room. Thomas took a step back, his voice faltering. "I'm trying, Sarah. I'm still here." The phone on the table buzzed sharply. Both of them turned toward the sound. The name on the screen glowed in the dim light. "Ethan, who's that?" Thomas asked, his voice quieter than before, but far colder. Sarah's grip tightened on the wine glass. "No one," she said too quickly. "Don't lie to me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, with a sudden crack, the glass slipped from her hand. It shattered across the tile, the wine spreading like blood, staining the white of her dress. Sarah stared down, breath trembling, a single drop of crimson running along her palm where the glass had cut her. In that red reflection, something inside her changed, something that could not be undone. Thomas crouched to gather the broken glass. The wine had seeped between the tiles, dark and sticky beneath his fingers. He reached for Sarah's phone, still lit on the counter, a faint vibration humming beneath the glow. A single message sat on the screen. "Ethan, did you tell him yet?" The words struck him harder than any blade could. Sarah snatched the phone from his hand, her breath quick and uneven. "You shouldn't have stayed out late so often," she said, her voice sharp with deflection. "You left me alone in this house while you played the hero at work." Thomas rose slowly, his eyes fixed on hers. "You think neglect justifies lying?" "Neglect?" she repeated, a bitter laugh spilling from her lips. "You call it neglect. I call it loneliness." The room swelled with silence again, but beneath it memories flooded his mind. Their wedding day beneath the autumn trees, her laughter echoing as the wind caught her veil. He remembered the first night in this very kitchen, dancing to no music, whispering promises they both believed would last forever. Now the air between them felt like a graveyard of every vow they had ever made. Sarah turned away, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "You should have stayed out of my phone," she said, her tone colder than the night air outside. Thomas hesitated, unsure whether to reach for her or leave. He noticed her hand trembling, not from fear but fury. She placed the phone down carefully, screen face down. and walked out of the kitchen without another word. The clock ticked louder than before, marking the seconds of a silence that had become unbearable. From outside, a car engine started. Thomas looked toward the window, confusion twisting into dread. The sound was faint at first, metal scraping against wood, a small, deliberate movement that froze Thomas in place. He turned toward the kitchen. Sarah stood by the counter, the drawer half open, her hand lingering above the knives. The candlelight flickered across the steel blades, throwing fractured reflections onto the tiled wall. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "Please, we need to stop this." She didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the drawer, her chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. The tension felt alive, pressing between them like invisible hands. Thomas took a step forward, holding his palms out. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy. I just needed to understand." Her eyes lifted slowly, and what he saw in them wasn't rage. It was exhaustion. "Understand?" she whispered. "You've lived beside me for years and still don't see who I am." He hesitated, unsure whether to move closer or back away. "Then show me," he said. "Show me who you are." Sarah's fingers closed around the handle of the largest knife. The sound of metal shifting against wood filled the silence. Her reflection in the blade looked like a stranger. Eyes hollow, mouth trembling, every trace of warmth gone. Thomas reached for her hand. "Sarah, listen to me." She raised her eyes, a tear cutting through the foundation on her cheek. "You never really saw me, did you?" The knife caught the dim light as she lifted it slightly, not in fury, but in sorrow. Thomas stood frozen, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound left in the room. The distance between them felt thinner than breath. The scream tore through the quiet street like glass splitting under pressure. A dog began barking 2 houses down, followed by the metallic echo of something crashing against tile. Curtains twitched across the row of semi-detached homes, faces appearing for only a second before retreating behind the safety of drawn blinds. Inside number 14, the dining room was chaos. The table had overturned, the wine bottle shattered, and streaks of crimson traced along the floor like rivers branching from a storm. Thomas lay motionless near the counter, his shirt torn, his chest slick with blood. The bouquet of roses he'd brought home was crushed beneath his arm, petals darkened and torn. Sarah sat in the middle of it all, her white dress soaked to a dull maroon. She stared at her hands, her breathing slow and deliberate. The knife rested beside her leg, its blade smeared with red, catching the flicker of candlelight that still burned stubbornly on the table. Outside, Mrs. Holloway from next door called the police, her voice shaking as she repeated what she had heard, shouting. A man calling a woman's name, then the silence that followed. Within minutes, the wail of sirens filled the street, blue lights pulsing through the narrow windows. When the first officer entered, Sarah didn't flinch. Her eyes lifted slowly, glassy but calm. The officer knelt beside her, speaking gently, asking what had happened. She turned her head, her voice barely audible yet chilling in its clarity. He shouldn't have lied. The officer exchanged a look with his partner, the hum of radios filling the air. Sarah's gaze drifted toward the roses on the floor. Their thorns pressed into the bloodied tiles. Detective Inspector Rowan Hale stood beneath the harsh glow of the kitchen lights, his expression unreadable. The air still carried the scent of iron and candle wax. Crime scene technicians moved methodically around him, their cameras flashing in intervals that cast fractured shadows against the walls. He opened his leather-bound notebook, its pages already stained from years of similar scenes. This was not the first domestic tragedy he had walked into. Yet something about this one unsettled him. Sarah sat on the living room sofa, wrapped in a blanket, her wrists bandaged where the knife had grazed her. She stared straight ahead, unblinking. Hale watched her in silence before turning back to the evidence bags laid out on the counter. The knife was smeared with both sets of fingerprints. The blood pattern told 2 different stories. The crime scene officer approached quietly. "No sign of forced entry, sir. Everything inside points to a fight, but her injuries don't align with self-defense." Hale nodded. "And the husband?" "Deceased at the scene. Multiple stab wounds. Right-handed attacker," Hale scribbled in his notebook. "She's left-handed." That single observation shifted the entire atmosphere in the room. Later, in his office, the detective laid out the photographs, phone logs, and printed emails. Sarah's messages were desperate, erratic, her tone shifting between affection and resentment. Thomas's replies were shorter, distant, filled with attempts at reconciliation. The final thread connecting them was control, a relationship corroded by jealousy and emotional decay. Hale's pen hovered over the page before he wrote a single note. Both victims of the same storm. He closed the notebook and stared at the crime board, the crimson thread looping around their photographs. The morning after the crime, rain struck the windows of the incident room like impatient fingers. Detective Hale leaned over his desk, the file from the financial team open in front of him. Rows of numbers filled the page, each transaction deliberate, calculated, almost invisible in its precision. A junior analyst stood nearby, shifting nervously. "It's an offshore account, sir. Opened 6 months before the stabbing. Regular deposits, all small enough to avoid alerts." Hale's eyes narrowed. "Whose name?" "Sarah Whitcomb." "Every transfer originates from the husband's firm." He exhaled, tapping his pen against the table. It wasn't theft driven by desperation. It was methodical. Someone had been preparing for an ending long before blood hit the tiles. He pulled up the digital ledger on his computer. The glow from the monitor lit his face in the dim office. Each transaction carried a note in the reference line: consulting, bonus, reimbursement. Lies disguised as routine payments. Down the hall, Sarah sat alone in the interview room, her hands clasped tightly on the metal table. Her reflection in the two-way glass looked calm, almost serene. Hale entered, placing a printed statement in front of her. "You moved £28,000 from your husband's accounts into your own." "Why?" She didn't look up. "He owed me," she said simply. "For what?" Her lips curved into something close to a smile. "For every night I waited for him to come home." Hale studied her, realizing the transfers weren't just about money. They were part of something deeper, an exit plan crafted with precision and patience. Detective Hale stood before the evidence monitor, the dim blue light flickering across his face. The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the machine as the USB drive loaded its contents. A single file appeared on screen, IMG Oro 45 MP4. He pressed play. Sarah appeared, framed in the small glow of a bedside lamp. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked directly into the camera, her breathing shallow. "If he ever tries to leave me," she said softly, "I'll make sure he never does." There was no rage in her tone, only despair stretched into something unnatural. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, leaving a faint streak of mascara. Her voice cracked as she continued. "I gave up everything for him. My family, my work, my name. He made promises and then he forgot them. I won't be forgotten." Hale watched the footage in stillness. The timestamp showed it had been recorded 3 days before Thomas's death. The video flickered. Sarah leaned closer to the lens, her expression empty yet deliberate. Love isn't meant to fade. If it does, then it was never love. The screen went black. Weeks later, the courtroom fell into absolute silence as the prosecutor paused the video on her final frame. Sarah's tear-streaked face staring blankly into the void. The jurors shifted uneasily, their eyes fixed on the frozen image. Sarah sat motionless at the defense table, her hands clasped together, her eyes dry and distant. Detective Hale watched from the back row, the faint murmur of whispers rising around him. He had seen confessions before, but none that carried this kind of precision. A woman documenting her own descent into darkness. The air in the courtroom hung heavy, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. Every seat was filled, yet no one dared breathe as the jury four-person stood, verdict slip trembling in hand. Judge Harland adjusted his glasses, his voice steady. "In the matter of the Crown versus Sarah Whitlow," he paused, glancing briefly at her, "we find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder." The silence that followed was absolute. No gasp, no whisper, only the faint creak of the wooden benches as a few heads turned toward Sarah. Her face remained unreadable. Not fear, not relief, something in between. The faintest quiver crossed her lips before she straightened her posture, eyes fixed on nothing. 2 guards approached, their hands gentle but firm as they locked the cuffs around her wrists. Detective Marlowe stood by the gallery rail, the verdict echoing through him like a dull drumbeat. He'd seen monsters pretend to cry and innocence break under lies, but Sarah was neither. She was something far stranger. As she was led away, the first sound came, the shuffle of photographers outside, shutters snapping in a frenzy. Was it jealousy? One shouted. Did you plan it? Cried another. Sarah kept walking, her white blouse soaked through by the sudden rain. Marlowe stepped onto the courthouse steps, the storm's reflection turning the pavement into liquid mirrors of blue and red light. Reporters pressed forward, but he didn't answer. He lit a cigarette, eyes following the van that carried Sarah away. In the end, he murmured to himself, it was never about hate. He exhaled slowly, watching the smoke twist into the rain. Just love gone rotten. Winter had stripped the city bare. The rain was colder now, falling in thin, steady threads against the station's windows. Detective Marlowe sat alone at his desk, the dim lamp casting a golden halo across the clutter. Case files, photographs, and a single unopened envelope marked HMP Blackwell Women's Prison. He turned it over once, twice. The handwriting was delicate, the same looping script from the confession video labels. He slid it open with his penknife, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. Detective Marlowe, they say time heals, but it doesn't. It only teaches you how to bleed quietly. Her words bled off the page, neat yet frantic. I never meant to kill Daniel. I only wanted him to understand the fear he gave me. The kind that sits behind your ribs and waits for you to break. When he looked at me that night, I thought he finally did. But I was wrong. Marlowe leaned back, jaw tightening. The faint hum of the overhead light filled the silence. I still dream of him, sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes by the window. He never speaks. He just stares, waiting for me to say sorry. Tell him I still kept the roses. The final line was underlined once, pressed so hard the ink bled through. He folded the letter carefully, eyes shifting to the evidence shelf. Among dozens of tagged bags sat one marked Exhibit 14B. Inside, brittle red petals clung together like flakes of old blood. As Marlowe stared at them, Sarah's voice seemed to whisper from nowhere, soft, almost tender. Love doesn't die. It just changes shape. The light flickered once. Outside, the storm began again,